All right, thank you everyone for attending. You've been served on-premise strategies for a saturated market. My name is Eric Kozlik. I'm the founder and principal consultant at Direct Fire Consulting and the host of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. Just a quick housekeeping note before we get started here. I've got a lot of content to get through. I may have overloaded these slides a little bit. So you will have the opportunity to download everything from a QR code at the end. All the slides, all the extra resources that I reference throughout this presentation, all from one QR code at the end. If you can't stay, come find me. I'm very available here. I'll be at the Signature Serve Invitational from noon to 3 tomorrow. You can get these slides. No need to snap photos with your phone unless that's something you're into. I have been working with both distillers, specifically craft distillers, and bars and restaurants in a number of different capacities for the last decade. So that work, combined with my work as a spirits judge and as a podcaster who constantly interviews world-class bartenders and distillers, has given me kind of a three-dimensional insight into this interesting space where the on-premise world meets the craft distilling world. And what I'm hoping to use that insight to unpack today is sort of a thorny and pervasive positioning issue that is plaguing specifically the craft spirits market with folks who are trying to either enter the on-premise for the first time or who enter the on-premise with a few accounts and just can't figure out a way to scale beyond a local market or a handful of loyal on-premise accounts. So I'm going to do that by talking about the recent event where this positioning problem first whacked me over the head like a 2x4. Then we're going to go into some of the strategies that are very achievable that you can use depending on the type of spirits portfolio and price points where you're sitting to hopefully make some progress in the on-premise. And as we go through each of the four strategies that I lay out in the matrix, I'm going to give you some ideas on how to roll these strategies out in a way that makes sense for your brand. So I do most of my work on the East Coast. I'm based in the Mid-Atlantic, and one thing you'll notice about that lovely region of the world from this map of the US at night is that there's like a zillion people there. And there's like 1.5 million restaurants and bars serving those zillion people. And in these large primary markets on the East Coast, I have never had a problem walking into a bar or a restaurant and finding enthusiastic bartenders and beverage directors who are excited to serve craft spirits. So that said, about a year or two ago, I was approached by a group of distillers operating in one of these large primary markets on the East Coast. They'll remain anonymous to spare the reputations of the innocent, but they came to me and they said, hey, we want to figure out a way to send consumers to the places who are selling our spirits, who are pouring straight pours and making cocktails using local spirits. So we said, okay, no problem. We can put together a digital resource, a web page, an app, something where people can go and quickly identify where in their neck of the woods is serving locally made spirits. So great, we've got our plan. They send out an email to the rest of this large distiller organization and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Look at your accounts and see who has been doing a great job for you in the on-premise so that we can return the favor and send consumers to them, right? Send us your top-performing accounts so that we can give them some love. So maybe you see where this is going. Maybe this isn't a surprise to you, but it was certainly a surprise to me that we got almost zero adoption from that. Pretty much everybody who did care to respond to us basically said, well, I don't feel comfortable sharing my accounts because how do I know that as soon as you publish this list, everybody in this organization isn't going to go and try and poach those accounts from me? So that initiative died on the vine, completely failed to launch. Not proud of that particularly, but one thing it did prompt me to go and do is think a lot about what is the problem in terms of getting craft distillers to feel more comfortable in the on-premise space. And as I thought, and as I went over, talked to some of these distillers after the fact and went over some of the other experiences I'd had in the past, it occurred to me that there's kind of two related issues here. One is that if you just look at what happened in that scenario, you see a lot of resource guarding and treating on-premise accounts almost as if it's a finite, sort of scarce resource. And to me, what that signals, more than anything else, more than any of the excuses you could throw out there like, oh, I don't have people to go and maintain my accounts, or, oh, bartenders are flaky people, or whatever, is that it signals a lack of control on the part of the craft distiller trying to get their products placed and sustainably utilized in the on-premise. And the more I dug into it, again, when you get past the sort of easy surface level excuses of like lack of resources, what you come down to is an unclear positioning, a lack of understanding about how to say, here's what I am, here's who I am, here's what I do, here are the products that I make, and here is the way among many possible ways that I've decided that these products work best in the on-premise, right? And that's, in a nutshell, what positioning is. It's knowing exactly where what you are starts and stops, and not treating the on-premise like a monolith of people who are ignoring you, but trying to figure out, okay, well, if these types of folks don't want to work with my spirits, or my spirits don't work well in this particular setting, where's the setting where they are going to thrive? That's a confident, secure positioning from which you can grow your on-premise strategy. So before we jump in here, I do have a couple disclaimers. One, these are all distribution/distributor agnostic. You can do these things whether or not you have a distributor. In fact, most of you here know that in order to even schedule a meeting with a distributor, you need to show some pretty significant on-premise traction. So you should be doing these things even before you get a distributor. And once you get a distributor, they'll be really happy if you keep doing them. And of course, everything is contingent on the regulations in the states where you operate. We, as a country, have a lot of very strange and sort of crossed wires when it comes to who can do what and where. I'm not here to tell you exactly what the laws are where you're operating, so I trust you to be the final arbiter of that kind of information. Woo! See, this is why I didn't want PowerPoint, IT guy. I'll sort of translate this for you. Apologies for the tech issue. I promise these slides, when you download them from the QR, will be nice and clean. But here, the 4 strategies that we're going to talk about today are white label products, signature serves, custom cocktails, and flights and pairings. Okay? I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about white label products and signature serves because I feel like they're the most poorly understood and represent the best economic bang for your buck when it comes to on-premise partnerships. We'll hit on custom cocktails and flights and pairings towards the end, but basically the logic behind how I set this up is, when it comes to a partnership, you need to think about 2 things. One, who's doing the lion's share of the work in any given partnership, because whoever's doing the work should probably expect the best financial gain for their efforts. And then also, who is a given initiative about, right? Where do the eyeballs of the consumer end up with this kind of partnership? Do they end up on the distiller or the brand and the products that they're making, or is it primarily something that makes people excited about the bar or restaurant, right? So being clear on these 2 things kind of gives you a good basis from which to build these strategies. You may remember that I mentioned earlier that we're going to talk a little bit about price point and portfolio style. So before we get into the strategies, I do have one more quick matrix that is a quick and dirty way that is helpful for me when I'm thinking about how positioning works for especially craft brands in the on-premise. Wow, another one. So what we have here is a 3x3 matrix, and if I were, gun to my head, somebody says, you need to tell me the basic types of craft distilleries in only a few short words, right? I would say, all right, I'm going to break it down in terms of price point and portfolio style. Those are the 2 factors that I really think about when I think about on-premise positioning. Price point is pretty cut and dry, but I do want to distinguish the way I think about price point from the way that distributors think about it, which is a very fine-grained manner. They're drawing these very picky distinctions between super premium and ultra premium. But when the consumer goes out to a bar or a restaurant, there are 3 basic price points that they could pay: the affordable price point, the expensive price point, and the one that exists in between those 2. So for the purposes of this, think of your brand as existing either at a value price point, a craft price point, or a premium price point. You might be edging in one direction or another, but think of it in those 3 broad strokes. And then in terms of portfolio style, this bears a little bit more explaining. The 3 most common portfolio styles that you'll come across are a focused portfolio style, and for this I'll grab an example from my neck of the woods. Up in Baltimore, Maryland, there's Sagamore Spirit Distilling. They make rye whiskey, and rye whiskey. If it's not rye, they don't make it. They'll make different types of rye, but only rye. So that is a very focused portfolio style. A specialized portfolio style would be something more like a French liqueur brand. Perhaps they make French fruit liqueurs, French floral liqueurs, French herbal liqueurs, French bitter liqueurs, but it starts and ends at the borders of France and the borders of liqueur. So there might be a French liqueur for everyone in this portfolio. There might be dozens of products in it, but it's still specialized in that they've got these constraints that help them to develop their products, and they won't color outside of those lines. And then finally, we're all familiar with a diverse portfolio type. Sort of on the larger end, we think of brands like St. George or Leopold Brothers, and the advantage that they have is 30 or 40 years head start on everybody to develop their quality and to build relationships in an uncrowded market, right? So they might not be the best to think about in terms of a diverse portfolio, but everybody pretty much who launched a micro distillery between 5 and 15 years ago, making moonshine, then vodka, then whiskey, then rum and gin and cream liqueur, and et cetera, now all the way down into the long tail of distilled spirit specialties, could be considered a diverse portfolio style. Now, I bring this up because it's very easy to complain about and to focus on the weaknesses of your price point and your portfolio style. If you're at a value price point, oh man, people think that I'm not quality just because I'm affordable. If you're at a premium price point, people can't justify spending the money on my clearly premium product. And if you're somewhere in the middle, you've got complaints going in both directions, right? Instead of that, you really want to be thinking about your positioning in terms of finding people who are happy to pay the price point that you are at for the stuff that you're selling. Because those people exist, and the places where they go out to eat and drink also exist. And then in terms of the advantages of your portfolio style, we'll talk about those more. Got a great case study in just a second. But again, even if there are some limitations to your portfolio style, for example, I will not color outside the lines of rye whiskey, well, there's also some real advantages to that. So the 4 strategies that we're going to cover today, it'll become clear where those portfolio style advantages lay. I want to jump in with white label products, which again, I mentioned I'm very optimistic and kind of bullish on this on-premise partnership style because I think it has the potential to have a huge economic impact on a small or craft operation. And I say that because it's really efficient and can be high output if you scale it properly, if you find the right partners. The on-premise folks who get white label products placed in their bars and restaurants are obviously incentivized to push these over other stuff. This is like one of the few ways that you can actually go out there as a craft distiller and leapfrog a big international brand is by saying, hey, I'll make you a custom version and it'll be at the same price point. And then finally, when you're approaching people who might be interested in a white label product, these people tend to live in either high volume single establishments or in restaurant groups where they can spread whatever they order over multiple locations in a given geographic area. I'll hit you up afterwards. On the other hand, guests don't really get to see your brand when you are working with a white label product. Now, I'll give you an example of how to get around that potentially in just a slide or two, but you get less marketing value off of a white label play. It's more of an economic play for your given operation, and you can use that funding to do other stuff. So even if you're not getting a lot of marketing value from a white label project with a bar or a restaurant group, you can think of it as more of an economic play than a marketing one. It is lots of work on the front end, but if you do that well, and if you can get a white label product that is sustainable over long periods of time, quarter after quarter, year after year, and the restaurant or the restaurant group is very happy with this white label product, it becomes very profitable after 1 or 2 series of production runs. It's kind of like a set and forget kind of situation. It does require a little bit of maintenance and follow-up. The better you can be integrated and in communication with the data, the sales data from the venues themselves, the more successfully you will be able to provide support to them and make sure it has a nice long lifespan. But there is a little bit of work you have to do. It's not just make a product and then it just prints you purchase orders from then on out. What kind of portfolio styles are best optimized for this? If you think about a white label product, by definition, it's something that is going to be an upsell at a bar or a restaurant. So it's not going to exist very often at that value price point. And similarly, it's really not going to exist very often at the premium price point. White label product partnerships are really well primed for the craft price point. And when it comes to talking about the superpowers of certain portfolio styles, think about if you're a diverse portfolio style craft distiller, right? You are positioned super well for this type of partnership because no matter what kind of bars and restaurants are in your area, well, you already make everything, right? So even if there's something that they want that you don't make, you've already set the precedent that you make a wide range of stuff. So why not expand it to play around with this thing that they want and need? So there's not a ton of other strategies that I'm going to talk about today. They're as well suited to the diverse portfolio style as white label products. So I just want to throw that out there as I'm really bullish about diverse craft portfolio styles and price points for this kind of partnership style. Will you occasionally find the high-end restaurant in your area that just so happens to want the very specific type of thing you make in your focus portfolio? Maybe. And will you occasionally find, for example, like in a tourist market, somebody who's at a lower end or like more tourist high volume restaurant who wants you to turn around and make everything they serve at a low price point? Maybe also, but that's not something you can bank on. So this is kind of how I think about positioning in the white label partnership arena. Here's a couple examples. We've got St. Regis Barrel Select Gin by Alpine Distilling. Now this is way at the end of one spectrum, right? If you look at this packaging, there's really nothing about Alpine Distilling on this bottle. And that's okay. I mean, like if you ask, they're not gonna lie and say that they made it at St. Regis, right? They're gonna tell you who made it. But the purpose of this is to feature the St. Regis brand and the St. Regis brand alone, right? Now look, on the other hand, we've got an example here from DC, my home market, Cotton and Reed, the Emu Queen's Share Pachuga style rum. This was a rum, a small project that they distilled for one cocktail on one cocktail menu. And the nice thing is, beautiful little upsell here. They sell you the cocktail and then they say, oh, by the way, for $10 more, would you like a 1 ounce pour of this special limited edition rum to sample by itself? And the answer is, duh, yeah. At least for me. And so you'll see on that label, they've got the Cotton and Reed logo there and the Silver Lion logo as well. So it's a great play for Silver Lion as an international restaurant group entering the DC market. They want to show that they're dedicated. They're not just carpetbaggers coming into town from overseas and usurping our hotel bar scene. They want to work with local brands, so it's a good look for them, and it's a great way for Cotton and Reed to say, hey, everybody who's traveling to DC at this hotel bar, you know, there's a local rum distiller if you're into that sort of thing. So a great partnership. So it is possible to get your brand out there on white label products, but it is something you need to negotiate. The optimal pitch for a white label collaboration is as follows. Could I persuade you to replace your existing whatever if I make you a custom version with your brand on the label for the same price? Now, that requires work, right? Making things costs money, and getting things to the right price point is not easy. But if you think about things from a beverage director standpoint, beverage directors are going to be the ones that you're approaching for this kind of partnership because they're managing either the high-end venue or the restaurant, the beverage program at the entire restaurant group. They've already got something working. If you notice them as a restaurant group or a high volume venue, something's already working for them. And so you're approaching them to try and fix something that ain't broke. And the only compelling way for you to make that argument to a decision maker is to say, hey, I'll do it custom and I'll do it at the same price, and then it's gonna work even better than it's working now. That's the pitch. In terms of rollout, when you're developing the product, you got to get them into the distillery or get them involved somehow in the product development process. Get them in, buy them lunch, make sure they're taking photos and taking selfies and getting really invested in you as a brand. And then once you get buy-in on the actual product formulation, you need to go to them and say, hey, listen, we need to plan these runs however often you want these runs. And for that, we need data, okay? And so you need to kind of get a sense of how much of this product they're already selling. And with that information, you can do things like sign contracts, sign agreements, create incentives for them. Maybe you do a price drop if they lock in a minimum case order every quarter. If you are a little bit scrupulous with the way that you form your partnerships and you actually get some stuff on paper, you can lock in guaranteed sales with this. And then finally, when you do your follow-up with this, if you can find a way to legally incentivize people to really push this product right out of the gate, there's two things you can do with that sales data. You can go back to the restaurant group or the high volume bar that you're already working with and say, hey, look how well your bartenders are pushing this stuff. Would you like another one? Would you like another white label product? Or conversely, if they're not interested, take that data on the road and use it to say, hey, here's a case study. Here's what we just did for this place. I'd love to do the same thing for you. So that's an example of having confidence in your portfolio style, taking it, grabbing some data from it, and using that to actually scale an on-premise strategy overall. Next, I want to move on to signature serves. This is another partnership strategy that is very poorly understood, which is part of the logic behind the Signature Serve Invitational, which some of you may be familiar with. I'll talk to that in a minute. But in short, the advantages of a signature serve cocktail is that they are super simple and cost effective. They have a really great viral potential, which is baked into the way that they're formulated. Now here's where I reference another resource that you can get at the end at the QR code. I presented an hour-long webinar specifically on signature serves for the bartenders and brands who are participating in the Signature Serve Invitational. So if you go to that QR code, you can scroll down, click on the YouTube video of that recording, and you can check out that entire hour-long webinar that goes deep, deep, deep into how to program that virality into the cocktail build. It's also a great use case for a flagship product. And especially in the craft space, a lot of people's flagship products get snowed under by the other stuff that you release. It gets less attention than the stuff that's new, or less attention than the stuff that has perhaps been in the barrel longer. But flagship products are great because they tend to be, A, a little bit more on the affordable side and therefore really great for cocktails, and B, they tend to, if you launch with it, clearly it represents who you are and what you represent as a brand. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't have launched with it, right? And so a flagship product makes a great, compelling case for a signature serve cocktail. Unfortunately, they can't be made with just any products. We'll go into that in a second. They are difficult to develop precisely because of how simple they need to be and how every millimeter of a signature serve cocktail needs to be packed with brand information so that people can't miss it. And they do require a lot of marketing energy, not just to bars and bartenders in this case, but also to consumers. Because if the consumers don't know to ask for the signature serve, and if they don't know that that signature serve can only be made with the specific product that you make, then it's not working correctly. Speaking of the definition, a signature serve cocktail is a simple viral cocktail that celebrates a specific product by a specific brand. Okay? When we think about this definition, a number of cocktails are going to jump to mind. A few are, for example, the Dark and Stormy featuring Gosling's Black Seal rum, right? You put that on your cocktail menu with a different rum, you might find a little cease and desist letter in your inbox from their attorneys, famously. There's the Painkiller with Pusser's rum, the Jaeger Bomb, right? Not technically a cocktail, but certainly a signature serve, and certainly what put Jägermeister on the map in the US market. And a little sleeper, we don't think of the Aperol Spritz as a signature serve, but in fact it is actually one of the most effective signature serves ever developed. If you think about it, there's like a $20, $22, maybe $25 if you're in DC, like bottle of Amaro or Aperitivo, and like a $6 bottle of Prosecco, splash of soda, orange. Like how much does that cost to make? So simple and cost effective, almost no better example than the Aperol Spritz. So what kind of products are best primed for signature serves? If you look at these cocktails, Dark and Stormy, Painkiller, Jaeger Bomb, Aperol Spritz, they all seem to be pointing at different types of consumers. They're all doing different stuff. So what ties them together? What makes an effective signature serve if it's not anything that we can readily identify from this slide? Well, they need to stand on their own. The products that you use in a signature serve cocktail need to stand on their own and not derive value from the other products around them in a portfolio. So if you have 9 whiskeys in your portfolio and you launch a 10th whiskey, chances are that 10th whiskey is not going to be the thing that cracks the signature serve code for you because the value of that 10th whiskey is predicated on everything that comes before it and everything that sits next to it on the shelves. It's an extension of that story of your brand. It's not the definitive story in the same way that it is with a flagship product in many cases. It's got to exist at a cocktail-friendly price point. Otherwise, it's not effective. And here's the tension. This is the thing that's most important. Signature serve, products that are primed for signature serve cocktails maintain this tension, and it's a very difficult tension to maintain. On the one hand, they have an incredibly wide audience appeal, or they at least aspire to. Because remember, Jägermeister didn't exactly have wide audience appeal when it first came into the market. It didn't get that until it met its perfect partner in half a highball glass of Red Bull, right? So in that case, it was the signature serve that actually cracked that code for Jägermeister, which before that was like not widely appealing whatsoever. So there's the widespread appeal on one hand, and it still needs to have some sort of unique or specific value proposition. It can't be so widely appealing that it fades into the background of all the other products of that type in the category or on the market. So maintaining that tension between wide appeal and the specific value proposition is the real tricky thing about finding a product that's perfect for a signature serve. The focused portfolio style is definitely where you're going to see a lot of these fall into. And of course, because it's a cocktail, you're going to be seeing the craft and value price points as the places where you can most effectively place a signature serve on a menu. So the Signature Serve Invitational is from 12:30 to 3 tomorrow. I invite you all. I hope you can all swing by, free to attend, and your vote will dictate the winner of the competition. But I want to go through the competitors here and point out exactly how these folks are maintaining that tension between broad appeal and the specific value proposition. So we've got blasphemous American agave spirit. So broad appeal, well, it's agave. We all know that that's the biggest category, most popular category right now, but they're an American agave spirit. So they're not tequila, not mezcal. They've got this weird amburana finish going on. Ooh, what's that all about? The bartender who made their cocktail said it drinks like a whiskey, tastes like tequila, and smells like mezcal. So that is a very specific value proposition that is kind of supported by the larger backdrop of, ooh, agave. We've got Rebecca Creek whiskey. They've got a lovely blended Texas whiskey, and in their brand storytelling, they've got some really compelling stuff about limestone water. So I'm thinking whiskey from Texas at a really affordable price point, limestone, I'm thinking highball. And so you'll have to come and see what the bartender that worked with Rebecca Creek whipped up for them at the competition tomorrow. We've also got Desert Door Texas Sotol, again, that agave adjacent thing, but they're not quite agave. Like Blasphemous, they're Sotol, and they're kind of doing a slightly different thing. They've got different flavors to talk about. So wide appeal, but somehow there's something different going on here. Andalusia whiskey, they've got American single malts. They're going to be using their Striker, which is a smoked American single malt. And if you think about cocktails in general, all of our smoke is imported. It's either from Scotland or from mezcal, right? That's where the majority of smoke in American cocktails comes from. And so it begs the question of like, what about a smoky American single malt? What happens when the smoke source is American? Is there a story to tell there? And finally, we've got Devil's Grin Texas Gin. And you may be thinking, all right, gin. Specific value proposition? Maybe. Widespread appeal? Also, maybe. It's gin. Kind of polarizing. But gin seems to be more primed for like classic cocktails, right? Martinis, Negronis, gin tonics, or riffs on those. But in the case of Devil's Grin Gin, they've got a signature botanical in mesquite bean. And that creates a different profile, a local point of interest to talk about. And so they also have an entry in the Signature Serve Invitational. And my favorite thing about Devil's Grin is that they have a lifeboat for anybody who might be upset about the diverse portfolio style. And that lifeboat is, you can always go from diverse to focused by simply slicing off a product and giving it its own packaging and its own brand. Okay, so Devil's Grin Gin is made by Silver Star Spirits. They have a vodka, a coffee liqueur, a regular whiskey, and some other flavored whiskey, and now a gin. That's a diverse portfolio if I've ever seen one, but they know that they have something special with Devil's Grin Gin, so they doubled down on that, created its own packaging, its own brand, its own digital and physical presence, its own website, and so they have doubled down on that as a portfolio of one that sits right next to their other portfolio. So you can always go more specialized, but it's a little bit more difficult. Actually, it's nearly impossible to go the other direction and start focused and then start throwing a bunch of other stuff in there and confusing people. So I do love that about Devil's Grin Gin. Gonna hit custom cocktails next. These are a little easier. These last two are a little easier, maybe slightly less lucrative potentially in terms of partnerships, but I really love custom cocktails because this is really your opportunity to build community with bartenders. And if you win bartenders, you get this wonderful effect because bartenders bounce around a lot. So in a previous life, I ran a craft bitters brand, and I had one bartender from DC take my bitters from multiple bars to DC, to multiple bars in Baltimore, to multiple bars in Nashville, back to multiple bars in Baltimore. And every time he went to a new bar, he placed an order for several cases. And so I got that benefit as just a little tiny bitters brand. Imagine if you could do that to the tune of several dozen bartenders who are really interested in your brand and really into what you do. That's pretty powerful exposure. The other thing about custom cocktails is that they flex and evolve with trends in a way that, by definition, signature serves do not, right? So they have a shorter lifespan. Maybe the lifespan of a custom cocktail is only 3 months on a quarterly cocktail menu refresh, the seasonal menu for whatever bar or restaurant that is. Maybe it dies after that. But the nice thing is that trends rise and fall. And like a signature serve is not going to be able to, that's set in stone. You can't really change a signature serve, otherwise it breaks. But custom cocktails, well, you kill one off and then something else is getting popular. Let's see if we can work your product into a custom cocktail that's more on trend. On the other hand, the focus is definitely, this is where the focus switches to the bar or bartender again, right? This is not on the distiller or the product per se. Now, they might talk your product up to the customers, but really it's about the bar or the bartender. It's a smaller inherent target audience than in the signature serve potentially, and the white label product, which is targeted at anybody who walks into that bar or restaurant. Really, this is targeted at people who drink craft cocktails at craft cocktail bars or craft cocktail bartenders work. So slightly smaller audience, and you do need to invest heavily in bartender education if you want this to work out. In terms of portfolio styles, again, we're seeing really good potential adoption here at the craft price point because that's where craft bartenders live. This one's really simple, right? You might see some really nice, really well presented premium and some really well branded value products getting adoption in custom cocktail programs, but by and large, based on the price points that these folks list their cocktails at and the way that craft bartenders like to build their cocktails, you're gonna see most of the adoption at the craft price point. A couple examples here of people who have actually scaled their custom cocktail partnerships through cocktail competitions. Bar Hill Gin has their annual Bee's Knees Week. They get hundreds, probably thousands of bartenders across the country making Bee's Knees cocktails with their gin. And it's kind of interesting that they're doing almost like an upside down signature serve with this. Instead of saying, we're building this cocktail specifically around this brand, they're saying, hey, look at this classic cocktail, the Bee's Knees. Easy to drink, everyone loves it. You know the best product to use in that? It's Bar Hill Gin, because it makes the best Bee's Knees. And do you want evidence of that? Well, here's hundreds or thousands of bartenders who are making custom versions of their favorite using our gin for an entire week, who would be happy to explain to you why Bar Hill is so great. So it's a great initiative for them, great way to get people buying bottles of Bar Hill into their bars every year. And a very different example would be Ming River Baijiu with their Cocktails with Bite competition. They realized that based on the nature of Baijiu, it's inherently designed to be consumed with food, right? That's how it developed. And their expression is also extremely food friendly, and the places who serve it tend to have really interesting food programs. So they doubled down on that, and basically the Cocktails with Bite competition is an excuse for them to say, hey, here's a cocktail competition, make a cocktail that's designed to pair with food, and what happens when somebody walks into their bar or restaurant and orders that food item? Obviously, they're going to turn around and try and sell them that cocktail. So it's basically Ming River holding the hand of the bartender from a distance, saying, hey, here's how you develop cocktails with Ming River. You develop them to pair with food items. Here's an example for a competition, and then the light bulb goes off, and now the bartender knows how to do that with that product, wherever they decide to go. To round things out here, I want to talk about flights and pairings. This is the strategy probably best designed for the premium, the high-end brands who are charging higher price points, right? So if you're working with long-aged spirits or stuff with triple-digit price tags on it, you want to be looking at flights and pairings. Specifically with flights, one of the advantages, this is really embarrassing marketing speak, vertical/horizontal multi-SKU potential. It just means they're going to buy multiple bottles of your stuff. Whether it's a horizontal tasting where they're buying multiple products, or it's a vertical tasting and you have something like a distiller's release annually where they have like a 2022, a 2023, and a 2024. It's a great way to not just get one bottle behind somebody's bar or on somebody's flight list, you get 3, 4 potentially. This can also scale to barrel picks, right? The logical evolution of getting your sort of high-end barreled expressions behind somebody's bar is to get an entire barrel of that behind somebody's bar with a larger program. Or it's a great way to think about if you're doing really well in the off-premise right now, for example, and you've already got a successful barrel pick program with liquor stores, why not try and use that successful barrel pick program to kind of reverse engineer yourself an on-premise program that walks and talks a little bit like that. And of course, there's the benefit of trying before you buy, right? Try it in the off-premise or the on-premise, and then that gets adoption in the off-premise. The sort of detractors of flights and pairings, and I should define pairing at this point. When I say pairing in this context, I mean any situation in which a spirit is paired specifically with any food item. So you can think of that on the one hand, like beluga vodka and caviar, right? Something has become the logical/iconic pairing with a specific type of food item. Or you could think about it as a situation where you're partnering with a chef at a bar or restaurant and coming in and doing a whiskey dinner, which is basically a little mini pop-up of your distillery tasting room in their bar or restaurant for a single night, where you can walk out with suddenly a lot of, like a whole handful of brand enthusiasts from that single dinner. So that's what I mean by pairings, anytime a spirit is linked to a food item. Unfortunately, the types of venues that are prime for these are just scarcer than the types of venues that would serve signature serves or custom cocktails or would adopt a white label product. There's just fewer folks out there who are running these kinds of programs. And in order to get in, you can't just sort of waltz into these places. It is reliant more so on building relationships over time. So flights and pairings is a great way to be a part of a community and engage with the types of places where the people who love high-end spirits tend to go to enjoy food and drink, but it's not a quick play in the same way as that you can rapidly educate bartenders on a new product or rapidly iterate and create a white label product for someone. This is a much slower play, and it should be thought of almost as more of a marketing than a sales move. Obviously, as I mentioned, more for the high-end price point. Craft operations can think about operating with flights and pairings. It's not off the table for craft, but I'll address that in this slide. If you're operating at the premium price point, you're going to want to go for a wider geographic focus than you would at the craft price point, because your higher price point means there are fewer people who are willing to pay that high price in a small area. So you need to cast a wider net, build a bigger tent if you're at a premium price point. But what that opens up is the opportunity for not just food pairings more so than at the craft level, but also branded partnerships, pairings beyond food, right? So if you make a premium whiskey or a premium barrel-aged product that's not a whiskey, for example, what other things do those folks who enjoy that also like? Do they like cigars? Do they like cars? Do they like watches? Do they golf? Where do they go on vacation? These are all pairings that you can do outside of the food realm that still allow you to kind of hijack the signal of something that these folks are really attracted to. But again, that's more so for premium brands than craft brands. If you're craft, what you do want to play more so on is that sense of community, that sense of locality, right? So let's say, for example, you're operating in a region with an established tourist presence, like a spirits trail of some sort. If you're operating at the craft price point, one of the things that you would want to do, for example, in order to capitalize on flights and pairings, is to figure out where people are staying and where people are going out to eat when they go to that area specifically for that type of tourism, so that you can be in those places and be seen by them when they visit. So they enjoy your stuff while they're there, and let's say they're nostalgic eventually. If you live in a market where you can ship e-commerce, then if you have enough exposure when those folks are visiting and they keep on seeing, oh wow, you know what, I saw that bottle last night when we went out too. Oh, that looks like they've got a flight. Maybe tonight I'll get that flight. It's about being there and becoming a part of that local ecosystem, especially if you've got people passing through for tourism. That's the play for flights and pairings at the craft price point. Overall, for white label products, you're going to be doing outreach to beverage directors. For signature serves, you're going to be doing outreach to consumers and education to consumers. Custom cocktails, it's all about bartender education, bartender education, bartender education. And for flights and pairings, it's all about finding the people who can exercise that downward control in the program, whether it's chefs or ownership or managers in some situations who can help to put pressure to get your flight listed on the menu or to get that whiskey dinner scheduled. So I did a quick heat map here based on all the strategies that I put together, and you'll notice basically what I did is I weighted every green square as 2 and every yellow square previously as a value of 1. And so, oh geez. So what that looks like is that at the focused craft and the specialized craft price point times portfolio style, where those things intersect, you've got a lot of options. So that's a pick your poison scenario. And with all these options, you just need to be thoughtful about how you select your on-premise strategy. It probably doesn't make sense to pursue all of those on-premise strategies at once if you are in the focused or specialized craft price point. On the other hand, if you're at that diverse craft price point, you should absolutely be thinking about white label if you're not already doing that. And if you're at the focused value price point, you should really be thinking heavily about the signature serves, because those are two things that are so well primed for that position that if you didn't at least try, it would sort of be a huge shame. So I apologize that the slides were all messed up. I promise if you go ahead and scan this QR code, you'll be able to pull up the non-messed up versions of the slides. It's going to take you to my Wave Connect profile, which is somewhere between a digital business card and a link tree. So you can follow me on all social medias. It's got my phone, my email on there, my website. Here are the downloads where you can download this slide deck and the slide deck for the Signature Serve webinar, which will be linked right down below my website. There's a YouTube video right down below the website now where you can hit up that webinar. You can find me at Direct Fire Consulting, and you can download the Modern Bar Cart podcast wherever you go to listen to podcasts. Happy to have this conversation with anybody offline, but I hope that I see you at the Signature Serve Invitational tomorrow between 12:30 and 3 p.m., and I hope you have a great rest of your conference. Thank you.
Sure. So,
Yeah, if I don't get kicked out, I'm happy to take questions now.
so what is considered really the difference between value and craft price points and the dollar per ounce?
Good question. I don't draw that distinction. It's the consumer that really draws that distinction, and different consumers in different markets are going to have a different definition of value in craft. Again, when you think about your brand with this, these are just really broad strokes, big buckets. So if you feel that you are on the cusp of between one of these price points, that's also kind of a piece of information, right? And maybe that in and of itself is a respect in which you may be slightly depositioned, because it might be an active question on the part of the consumer or the beverage director or the bartender as to, what does this really want to be? Is this really something that I should be putting into a value pour? Because it's a little bit too expensive for a value pour, but maybe it doesn't truly signal craft to me. Maybe the packaging or the everything else about it doesn't really scream craft. So they're not really, it doesn't occur to them to use it in a craft price point application. So if you're not clear about where it is in one of these big buckets, again, distributors have different rules in different buckets because they operate differently. But I'm speaking from a consumer mentality standpoint and from this is how bartenders and beverage directors think. So hopefully that was somewhat helpful. Any other questions? And we had one up front here.
I wasn't familiar with the term white label, but I figured.
Gotcha. Yeah, white label. Basically, somebody else's name on a product you make. Yep. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Do you have any thoughts or strategies on like how to develop that signature serve, like getting engaged with local groups and having like competitions and other thoughts like that?
Yeah, so we ran a competition about it. That's one way to do it. Signature serves are really tricky. I would encourage you to check out that webinar. That the whole YouTube video is up. Signature serves are so tricky that there's almost no right way to go about it, but I covered most of the wrong ways to go about it, if that makes any sense. So like if your product's too expensive, no chance. If your product doesn't have that specific value proposition, but that also the wide appeal, no chance. Everything else I do cover in that webinar. There's some tips and tricks specifically with virality and the ways to do that. So for example, service rituals are big for a signature serve, right? Think of a good example would be like the 3 espresso beans or the odd number of espresso beans on an espresso martini or the absinthe rinse in a Sazerac. Those would be quality indicators through a service ritual. So those are big. Visually striking is another thing. Aperol Spritz, dark and stormy are both visually arresting when you see them. That triggers the fajita effect. So you see a round of Aperol Spritzes go by and you haven't ordered yet. I'm sorry, you're about to get an Aperol Spritz. It is written. So stuff like that. So there are some strategies on the virality side that I cover in extreme detail in that webinar. So hopefully that's helpful. Definitely hit me up if you want to talk about ideas. All right, I'm going to get off the stage. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.